Of the Department of Juvenile Justice Work Group here today to talk about some of the recommendations that they are making to our administration on how to handle the DJJ crisis. We'll have about 15 minutes of opening statements, and then our principals will be available to take Q&A. I ask during that portion if you please identify who you are and who you're affiliated with, and then pose your questions. So with that, I will turn it over to Senate President Pro Tem David Givens.
In the absence of leadership, a problem becomes a crisis. And for those of us that have been engaged and involved in the Department of Juvenile Justice Work Group over the course of the last few weeks, what's going on there is truly a crisis. I'm going to provide a brief history of the trajectory of this problem growing into a crisis. And it starts with the 2017 program review conducted by the Kentucky Department of Juvenile Justice regarding conditions of confinement and an assessment summary of key findings and recommendations, the crux of which staffing is the problem. Following that, there was a very in-depth 2019 long-term CSG roadmap, Council of State Government's roadmap, regarding implementing evidence-based substance abuse and mental health treatment services, a path to try and meet these young people in crisis in these facilities where they are. Over the course of the interim, our legislative oversight and investigations and judiciary committees have met and discussed at length in two separate meetings the conditions in these facilities, the staffing concerns, and the needs as it relates to detention, specifically detention in the Department of Juvenile Justice. One of those recommendations we've been proud to see the administration adopt, and that was separating males and females and also grading these detention facilities in terms of their ability to hold challenging and high-level detainees. The last item on this path of us getting here today involved that first week that we were here in session and the Senate Concurrent Resolution number 31, establishing a work group of legislators to try to take this task on and find a way forward and make recommendations to the administration. In the spirit of that concurrent resolution, this bicameral, bipartisan work group of legislators did not want to delay in trying to address this crisis. So as we do with many issues in the General Assembly, people of like minds that want to roll up their sleeves and work on an issue do that, and that's exactly what happened in these circumstances. Trying to identify immediate, intermediate, and long-term ways to change the culture within DJJ. In a few moments, you're going to be hearing from our co-chairs that led these conversations over the course of the last few weeks, and I want to compliment Representative Bratcher and my colleague, Senator Carroll, on navigating these conversations in a very productive way. What I hope that you will take away from our conversation today: this work group has welcomed communication and participation from the Beshear administration. It includes members of both parties and both chambers, and it's operated in good faith, and I hope it will continue to do so as we try to work toward resolution. There has been substantial information that's come to light in these conversations that has been distressing, to say the least, and made it clear that money alone is not going to solve this crisis. Based on the discussions in this work group, there is a toxic culture that exists within DJJ, and there's been, again, a failure of leadership within that department. You're going to be hearing more from my co-chairs, but I want to start with an announcement of some good news. The efforts of the work group have been productive in the sense that the administration has responded. We've had communication via 2 letters to the administration. We've received the information back from the administration responding to our information requests. And today we're happy to announce that we have prompted the administration to take meaningful action, especially, as you're going to hear in a few moments, in regard to stabilizing these facilities immediately stabilizing these facilities. Now, to be clear, this group, this work group, and others have continued frustrations, but we're optimistic about what can happen over the next few weeks. We've been particularly pleased with the cooperation that we've received from the judicial branch and from Louisville government and judicial leaders in Louisville. And you're going to be hearing more about that in just a few moments. In the midst of all this, keep in mind that we have state employees in DJJ facilities that are being beaten up. We have youthful detainees whose lives are being changed forever, not because of something they did, but something that's been done to them by this system. The stories have been tragic, and now we're discovering, as many of you did late last night, that there are federal lawsuits that are being filed. As I conclude, I want to continue to challenge our reporting corps. The coverage that you've provided about this crisis has been vitally important in us trying to address the needs of our youth and our workers. Many of you have done a truly spectacular job. I want to cite two. Ms. Sharon Burton, close to my home community of Greene County. Ms. Sharon Burton with the Adair County Voice. And then here, closer to Frankfort, John Cheeves and the work he's done, Lexington Herald Leader. We need your continued efforts to help us get this policy right. I opened a moment ago by citing leadership failures as one of the causes of this crisis. Both explicitly and implicitly, we continue to call on the Beshear administration to identify and correct these failures in their Department of Juvenile Justice. I want to be turning the podium over to the Department of Juvenile Justice Workgroup co-chairs, Representative Bratcher first. Following his remarks, you're going to hear from Senator Danny Carroll, then from Representative Jason Nemus, and as Angela indicated a moment ago, after his remarks, we will be glad to take questions. Thank you. Representative Bratcher.
Thank you, Senator. Let me wet the whistle first. Before I speak on Louisville, I'd like to express a few more points that our work group is recommending to the governor's office and DJJ. There needs to be a tracking notification system. Our committee came across several issues where nobody knows where the kids are in the facilities. DJJ must develop and maintain a tracking system similar to the Department of Corrections COOL system, which would automatically notify authorized parents, legal guardians, and law enforcement agencies of a detained youth location. Our committee heard of a slightly shocking story of when law enforcement went to a facility to pick up a youth, and that youth was not there. Upon investigation, he was at another facility. This is an important item that needs to happen. Also, to address the shortage of manpower DJJ is experiencing, we would recommend a program that resembles the Trooper R program. If you remember that was a program that allowed retired troopers to come back into the system and pick up right where they left off with their salary and their pension system and their benefits such as vacation days and sick days. We would highly recommend that to happen to address the DJJ problem. Now on to the largest city in the Commonwealth. Juvenile crime is driving the crime wave in Louisville. That was a quote in our committee yesterday from one of the top law enforcement officials in Louisville. These crimes include murder and carjackings, and it's happening in my district in Fern Creek. I'm getting sick of it, and it's happening all over Louisville, and I know Louisvillians are getting sick of it. We had a great talk with Louisville leadership yesterday. One of the best talks I've ever had with Louisville leadership since the Yum Center. It was a great meeting. We spoke with Mayor Craig Greenberg, his awesome Deputy Mayor David James, the Chief of Police of Louisville, and 4 sitting judges that are on the front lines of the juvenile situation in Louisville. I can say we came out of that meeting all on board that Louisville is going to get a detention center, and a good one. More details will be coming soon. Stay tuned. And we were looking for a detention center in Louisville that would be close to the child's parents, guardians, and clergy. That is what many clergy and leaders in Louisville are asking for. I can say that we're pretty much bipartisan on most of the operations for this detention center. Stay tuned. Some exciting news is coming soon on that. Now I'll pass it off to my co-chair, Senator Danny Carroll.
Good morning. It is an honor to be here this morning, and want to thank leadership for allowing me the privilege of co-chairing this informal working group that has been working diligently on this issue for this past month. We met 2 days each week, and lots of homework in between those meetings, lots of research, visiting various facilities, trying to get some insight on what was actually going on in these facilities. In my 8 years in Frankfort, this has been one of the most productive groups that I have been a part of. As the President Pro Tem said, a bipartisan, bicameral working group. A lot of good ideas shared and a lot of unity in the fact that there is a crisis within DJJ. The struggle that we had through this process was to keep our focus on the immediate crisis dealing with the detention centers, because as you begin looking at that, there are various layers that start peeling back, and you realize that there's a lot more to be considered as we move forward. We had good cooperation from the executive branch, although it was conditional at times, and this group was able to have discussions with people that normally would not have felt comfortable appearing before the cameras. A lot of information has come in anonymously through phone calls, through contacts with various legislators that helped us to really understand what was going on. The testimony that was held before administration leadership was not as productive as we would like for it to have been, and there is still much more to be done in that area, and we're hoping that the administration will allow unfettered access to some of these folks. And I think it's very clear, anybody that's been in a leadership position, often you don't know what the problems are until somebody leaves or until something happens, because there is a fear of retaliation. A lot of self-preservation seems to be going on within DJJ at this point at various levels. And as the President Pro Tem said, one of the main things that I feel like we need to address immediately is a change in leadership within DJJ. You don't have the incidents happen that we've had continuously and not realize that there is a breakdown in leadership. And this appears to be something that the administration is simply not interested in talking about, in that there has been no response to our requests in those areas. Not easy decisions, but necessary. We need to bring someone in from the outside that can serve as a change agent to change the culture within DJJ. And by culture, I mean the culture within the leadership, the lack of communication, the self-preservation that has gone on, not just recently, but over several years. We have failed to evolve with the population that we're serving in these centers. DJJ worked great when it was first established and the purpose it was established for. It's not the same group of kids that are in these facilities now. These are more hardcore, more violent overall, and we have to adjust to that. We feel like that someone from the outside is the only way that that culture can be changed, and there needs to be accountability in these facilities. In my visits, specifically to the McCracken County facility, I learned that there was really not much structure, not much discipline within that facility, that staff was told that it's bad enough these kids are there. You don't make them walk a straight line, look straight ahead, and just the basic disciplinary functions of those programs are not in place. It was a location that was getting by day to day. Kids staying in their cells and their pods most of the day, classes in education not taking place because of violent outbursts, dysfunctional. Staff that I spoke to didn't feel like they had a lot of support. And from others that I've spoken to across the state at various facilities, it's the same story in every facility. Where do we go from here? Today, we will have the final meeting of the working group. As a result of that meeting, we hope to be bringing forth policy. At the top of that policy being the need to establish a task force to study these issues in depth. The governor's proposals for long-term need a lot of discussion. And I've said this a few times. The governor gets first word in this. The legislature will get last word. What's important is that we get the right word in between that. And this is too important not to get it right. And we must work together. There are some discrepancies on the best way to proceed. There are many within our working group that want to see the regional facilities survive. They don't want their kids from their district traveling throughout this state and staying in other facilities. And there are lots of different reasons for this. So we need to discuss more, and we need to come up with a better long-term solution. I also commend the governor for the short-term solutions, establishing these three facilities as high security facilities. However, they were slow to react to the need that was there and the violence that has occurred in these facilities, most recently in Warren County. Last week, at the end of our meeting, asked for one thing if we got nothing else out of that meeting from the administration, and that was to ensure that KSP was stationed at all three of those facilities. We were told that that would be taken back to the governor's office for consideration. A couple nights later, another staff member, another youth worker, got beat up at Warren County. KSP wasn't there. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a lot of work ahead of us in this area, and I'm very proud of the work of the working group and those that took the time to visit the centers, facilities within their region, and we will continue to address this crisis and very much open to working with the administration, but working, not policy for the camera, not headline policy, but fixing this. And it's something that we need each other to do effectively. We need the expertise that they can provide from the executive branch. They need the information that we have from people who won't talk to them. But I think together we can make a difference, and we can correct this problem to protect our staff and to move DJJ forward. Thank you. At this point, I'd like to introduce Floor Leader? Whip, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Majority Whip within the House of Representatives, Jason Nemus.
No, that's okay. So I think everybody can see the tone we're trying to set. We're trying to work with the officials in Louisville and all three branches of government and the city government. We're trying to work with the governor, and we're not in any way trying to get any political points. So I'm here to make 3 points. I want to commend the governor on some steps that he's taken. I want to clarify the record on one thing that I think that there's been a misstatement or misinformation that the executive branch has put forward, and then I want to challenge the governor to continue to move forward in the right direction. First of all, I want to give the credit where it's due, and that is I'll start by saying how this began, this most recent version of events, and that is there was a riot in the Linden facility in Louisville and an escape and an arson. A number of first responders were attacked by juveniles who had taken over the facility. Natalia Martinez reported on that in Louisville. I immediately had a meeting with Commissioner Reese in the Linden facility and the leaders in the Linden facility, and realized they weren't up to the job and they didn't have control of the situation. So The Legislative Oversight and Investigation Committee had a series of meetings where we were trying to sink our teeth into it and get to the bottom of these things. We immediately made some recommendations to the governor. They didn't take those actions immediately, but they did ultimately take those steps. And so I want to commend the governor for separating males and females, which is really important. We saw recently what happened in Adair County with the multiple males raping a female, and so that was a very important step to take that the governor has taken. He should be getting credit for that, for taking that step. As Senator Carroll said, we wish it had been done earlier, but it's been done, and so that needs to be pointed out. Separating our juveniles by seriousness of crime is also something we need to commend the governor on. As Senator Carroll said, that's not a long-term solution, but we have a fire going right now, and we had to address the fire, and the governor has done that by separating these juveniles based on seriousness of offense, and that's another good step forward. Putting a trooper at the most dangerous facilities is another step the governor has taken that we want to commend him for, and then providing defensive training and equipment, defensive equipment, so our staff members, our facility, can defend themselves and protect these juveniles is another step forward. So the governor has taken a number of steps, many at our request, to protect these facilities, to protect these children and staff in our facilities, and we want to be clear that we're very thankful that those things have been done to protect Kentuckians. The thing I need to clarify is about the budget. Again, we want to be in a spirit of cooperation, which is what I think all of us are trying to convey, but we also have to make sure that we correct the record when it's been misstated. The General Assembly, since I've been here for 6 years, has met the governor's request and exceeded it in some instances. Governor Beshear has had 3 budgets since he's been the governor. We have not only met his request, but exceeded it. In this past year, for example, we gave a much more significant raise to staff members than was requested. And we've also requested that the governor's staff get us a report for a 12% raise for state workers throughout the Commonwealth. And his report is not it's not sufficient. So we're continuing to work with them to try to make sure that they get us the information that we need so we can get much needed resources to all state workers, but especially, as we're talking about today, DJJ employees. The governor has said that he wants to get the frontline workers who are new to get them up to $50,000. While we commend the effort to raise the pay, and we certainly would have met that had he done that in one of his budget requests. We commend that effort. He's done that by using money for vacancy credit. So you have spots that aren't filled, taking the money that's been budgeted for those spots to other facility. That's a creative approach, but it's not sustainable. So we need a request to make that a sustainable increase in pay going forward. He said $50,000. We've questioned his staff on that. Why 50? And they couldn't defend it. So we can't just pull a number out of thin air and say, oh, $50,000. Well, is 55 necessary? Is 45 necessary? What is the number that's needed and why, based on data, and not just well, this is a good round number. So in his request that I hope he's going to make soon, we need information to tell us why that's the number that's important to solidify the safety at these facilities. So what do we need to do going forward? The important steps have been taken, but generally the easier steps have been taken. They weren't easy. They weren't easy, to be sure, but we've got big steps to be taken in the future. We must have access to all employees. Now, the governor says that he's not standing in the way of access, okay? But what the staff tell us is they don't feel comfortable, that they feel like their ability to speak with us is hindered. And so we want the governor to say to his staff in a written document or some formal way, you can speak to whoever wants to speak with you. There'll be no repercussions, and make sure that any staff, including staff that have things to hide, do not get in the way of that. That needs to come from the governor's office, the governor himself. We need an independent party to come and do an inspection of these facilities, give a full report of what's going on, what's gone on, what's the morale like, what's the incidents that have occurred, and also to look at reports that have been made, because we've had some serious allegations made by multiple people that reports have been doctored and changed after the fact. One said last night to me, they're works of fiction. So we need to make sure that an independent party gets into that and reports to the people's representatives. We need to explain the failure to enact the recommendations of the 2017 report that Senator Givens mentioned. Why haven't they been enacted? Some of them, it may be legitimate, but some of them we might need to push forward in the future to make sure that we're doing that. Trauma care for all, not only for the juveniles, which obviously have suffered so greatly here. Some of them in ways that it's unfathomable, but also to our staff. We've had 2 staff recently from Adair County that have been in the ICU for multiple days. One thought he was going to lose his life, and we have people who've not been physically harmed, who've been emotionally harmed. One piece of information that we have is there was a man in the control room. Obviously can't leave the control room because this was in the Adair facility where the kids had overtaken, they had rioted and overtaken it. And he saw his colleagues being beaten, and he couldn't help them. And most traumatic, I think, of all is that he heard the little girl being raped, and he couldn't do anything about it. And so that's tremendous trauma that must be addressed immediately, and I think the governor is working toward that. We need to make sure that continues. We've asked the auditor to come in and do an audit a full performance audit to make sure that that's another outside party that addresses the situation. But I think the single most important thing that can be done by the governor is we need an outside trustee to come in that doesn't answer to anybody in the Department of Juvenile Justice. The people of Kentucky have lost confidence in the folks that are running the Department of Juvenile Justice. Even if they were up to the job, which we don't think they are, even if they were, the perception is enough that would lead the governor, I think, to have an outside trustee come in and take over the department and fix it. Report to the General Assembly, report to the governor, but a trustee needs to come in. As we said, there's tremendous problems. Staffing is a major problem, but culture is a major problem. Leadership, I think, is the principal problem. And so the single most important thing the governor can do is to get a trustee to come in who has the full reins to find the problems, no matter where they are, no matter whose fault they are, and fix them. With that, we're going to call back up Senator David Gibbons, who will lead our question and answers. Thank you.
Thank you. And so as we prepare to go to question and answer, you've heard a summary of what we've done over the course of the last few weeks, specifically the 2 letters. One, a very pointed letter with bullets to the governor asking him to address immediate concerns. We were proud to hear the response that the governor is now putting KSP in these 3 high-level facilities 24/7 until sufficient staff is there. That was a verbal ask. That was our primary bullet in the letter that we wrote, along with other bullets that we'll be glad to address. When we conclude, and prior to you leaving, I would encourage all of you to get the one-pager that our comms folks have put together. It details every single bullet in the letter to the governor, those that have been met and those that remain to be met. In addition, as my co-leader from the House indicated, we've asked Auditor Harmon to do a long-term, intermediate to longer-term study, outside audit, not by the current accrediting body for prisons in the Commonwealth or across the United States, because there are severe questions about the quality of the work that the current accrediting body does. Those are federal government concerns about this accrediting body that Kentucky continues to cite as the accrediting agency for prisons here in Kentucky. But with that, we're going to stop and take your questions. Please.
I am not, and I want to make it clear with Secretary Harvey. I have known Secretary Harvey since I was probably a kid. We grew up in the same community. I know him to be a well-respected, honorable man. He has been, I think, in his position maybe about a year. And as you recall, one day when he testified about, I think this had to do with budget and why there wasn't a request related to DJJ, his response was simply he was not aware. And so I think the breakdown in leadership as far as the long-term issues is beneath his position. And when you look at where DJJ has been, and you all may know this number better than me, but like over the last 7 years, maybe 5 or 6 commissioners, how do you function at that level? How do you function under those conditions? So DJJ has just failed to keep up with the evolution of the population that they have served and failed to create an atmosphere of communication and of care and of restructuring when needed, and to deal with the evolution. But I hope that clarifies.
Yes, there's a good possibility that the old JYCD building could be open. I don't want to 100% confirm because we're in discussions, and I don't want to overstep where Louisville is. I just know that the leadership of Louisville is very interested. They're willing to work with us. We're willing to work with them, and it's needed, and I believe we're going to see it very soon. I do have a House Bill 3 dealing with DJJ. There'll probably be several bills this session, but one of them I'm sponsoring, and it's going to ask for $8.9 million to retrofit a building, and hopefully it's the JY building, to house a detention center.
How soon can that happen?
Well, I hope to get the bill passed this session, and then, the mechanisms take off from there. You know how government can be. Hopefully it'll be quick.
John Cheeves of the Herald Leader in Lexington. On the Louisville facility, I know Governor Beshear has said that they're slowly reopening the existing one, which had been physically inadequate. It's going to be open to very young offenders and the low-level offenders. Would your ideal be that the new Louisville facility be able to handle all levels, including people now being sent off to a DARE and other places around the state?
Absolutely. That's the goal. I know the governor is setting up Audubon, the Linden Road facility for 14 and under, low security, but that's not going to suffice. We're going to have a full-fledged detention center in Louisville. That facility in Linden was not built for a detention center. It was built for more like a youth development center or a day treatment center. Or I mean, every building could be retrofitted as needed if there's the dollars there. But we're going for a full-fledged detention center in Louisville.
I think you can find many different answers to that question, just depending on how far you want to track it back. And does it start within the home? Absolutely it does. And I think we all agree that to ever really make an impact on these issues, it's got to start at home, and we have to go from there. I think over recent years what we've seen is there's been a reduction, a pretty large reduction, substantial reduction in the number of low-level offenders that are in these facilities. Senate Bill 200 is part of that, and I think there is just not an appetite in society these days for juvenile offenders, low level, for them to be in detention facilities. And as a result, it's the more violent, serious offenders that are in these facilities. And the program was structured when DJJ was first created to deal with the kids that can be saved, that the programs work, and there are some excellent programs within DJJ. And so I think that's where it comes from. And you see that not only in the detention centers, but you see, I visited the Mayfield Youth Development Center twice in the last few weeks, and one of the recent assaults they had there, this was kids from Louisville that were there, and these were kids that were gang members, and so where these kids coming from the inner city, and I'm not being judgmental on these kids, the pertinent information to this is the gang relationships and the violence that these gangs perpetuate. And this is spread throughout the state as these kids go to different centers, and it creates an unsafe environment. So it's a different population. DJJ has got to adapt to that and maintain programs, but first and foremost, maintain safety.
If I could follow, before you ask your question, I'm sorry, I want to follow up on yours briefly because I think there's a really good point that needs to be emphasized, and that's the longer-term solution, and that's what you're asking about. Specifically, and I mentioned it in my remarks, I think I've got a copy here in my information that I brought with me. But the National Reentry Resource Center in 2019, with the help of the Council of State Governments, provided an in-depth roadmap of the needs of these young people in these crisis situations and the supports that should be provided to them. So one of the charges we're going to be putting to the auditor as he does a performance audit is to measure this administration's efforts toward implementing this roadmap of solutions to meet these young people where they are. Now, go ahead.
I know the focus is on the immediate crisis, but what was the trauma care that Representative Davis was talking about for both kids as well as adults?
So one of the things we've asked the governor to implement, and you'll see it as a bullet on the handout, the takeaway that you have with you, is immediate trauma support for the young people in those facilities along with the staff. Our state employee health plan provides trauma support. We're hoping that retirees, workers that have left those facilities are accessing those services. In addition, we've asked, for the sheer sake of humanity, to have an outside entity walk through these facilities and make sure that some of the stories that have been made available in the media and that we've heard word of mouth and secondhand are not still going on. Girls without showers for 11 days and then being made fun of on social media for not smelling correctly. We've got to be able to meet these young people's immediate safety needs, but also their mental health needs, and we're hoping that that trauma support can be provided.
What are you telling these families that have, these kids in juvenile facilities and they continue to see all these attacks, Warren County and Adair and the other rest of the counties? What are you telling these families?
I'll start, and then I think some others may wish to weigh in on that, because I think that's something that weighs heavy on me. To think about these families not just suffering the challenge of a child that may have chosen the wrong path, but then thinking about that child being either emotionally or physically harmed as a result of the punishment that what is supposed to be a credible institution, state government, is providing. And I can only imagine the suffering these families go through, and my heart breaks for them. We need to get it right for them and for their families and for those young, youthful detainees. Now, again, let's not kid ourselves. These are young people that have chosen some violent behaviors. But we still owe them the dignity of being protected and being cared for.
I'd like to say something too on that. We had a judge yesterday in our committee that said when she had a youth offender in front of her, that she felt at times it was better to release them back to the custody of their home, ankle bracelet, back to the community, than send them to DJJ system. And that is a heck of a remark if you think about it. That she wants to detain this youth because of the crime, and I don't know what the crime was, but she didn't want to send him, I think it was him or her, to a DJJ facility. And a lot of us took pause at that, thinking just what kind of, if the judges can't even depend on sending an offender to a safe place or a place where that's not the wild west, then there's a real problem, and there is a problem. That's why we're here.
We have time for one more question.
How are you guys going to get more people to work at these facilities? I've seen that you put more money into it that you're offering, but you're not getting anybody to take the jobs.
I think first and foremost, the priority has been the immediate crisis, and that's basically just stabilize these centers. The three centers now that are the high security with KSP presence at all three of those facilities, I think that will help to stabilize those areas and give those staff members there a sense of security. And I think the juveniles housed there will be less likely to do the things that they have been doing simply because of that presence. Long term, I think the money is going to help, but I can tell you that the conversations that I have had, I was told specifically, Senator Carroll, if the leadership is changed and the culture changed, you're going to see some people want to come back. And I think that has every much as bit to do with the problems that we face there as the financial part of it. There's no sense of being able to do your job. These youth workers are there to make a difference in these kids' lives, and they can't function daily because they're concerned about their safety. And that's something that has to be addressed so they can feel confident in their leadership. They can feel confident that when they have issues, it's going to make it up to the top level. And I think you will see folks start to come back, and once we can create a safe environment for them. And again, there's a lot of discussion to be had. This goes beyond our detention facilities, and we have to make sure that there is a structure in place that will make it a place to work again, make it a place that these workers can be proud of, that they're making a difference in the lives of those kids, severe as many of them may be. And we all need to look at, whether it's the executive branch or the legislative branch, the families need to know that we're going to make a decision that's going to ensure that those violent offenders that remain violent or other offenders that remain violent within these facilities, that we have the ability to protect their kids, whether that be in the 3 facilities we have, or whether we stick with the regional structure and maybe rehabilitate some of these buildings to ensure safety for those who are violent and those who are not. I think there are lots of different options that we can look at as far as a long-term solution in the model of how these facilities are structured.
As a follow-up, how understaffed are these facilities, generally speaking?
We have numbers on that, and I think in the Adair facility, I think they are 20, the number that I saw, 20-something staff short. And this is a crisis, and it has been for months, that has been occurring through COVID, and they have been borrowing from other areas, from youth development centers. I know that the facility in Mayfield lost some of their employees because they were having to go to McCracken to cover the shortages there, and that's not what those folks signed up for, and they lost many employees as a result of that, the youth workers. So I think we have numbers on all of that. Crisis without question, and has been for many, many months.